And you guys can open to John chapter 9. John chapter 9, this is part 4 of our series that we're calling The Problem of Evil and the Goodness of God. And we are attempting to face that question and that problem of evil, the quandary and challenge that philosophers have debated for centuries, really, concerning, well, if there's a God who is both all good and all powerful, then why does evil exist? And they usually talk of that evil in terms of two categories. There's what they refer to as moral evil, the horrible things that we humans do to one another in this world. And then there's a category they refer to as natural evil, which has to do with the curse and the natural disasters and diseases and disabilities and things like that. And so we are attempting to consider that problem, the problem of evil, and face the darkest parts of life in order to see the light of who God is, in order to appreciate more who God is, and to try to answer that question, that problem, to some extent, though I've been admitting all the way through that I'm limited and you're limited, and I don't know that we're going to ever fully comprehend these things, but hopefully we are being shown and God is revealing to us little by little more and more clearly who He is and what He's like, not by avoiding those dark realities, but by facing them and seeing them in the context of what He reveals about Himself and His plans in His Word, in Scripture. And so we're going to be in John chapter 9 today. Last week we looked at Joseph's story and we considered the evil that took place in his life as his brothers betrayed him and had murderous intentions toward him, and then all the hardships that he faced throughout his life. And we saw that God was in control of all that, and God used that for good redemptive purposes. Though Joseph, I'm sure, had plenty of questions and wrestled with God over the things that he was experiencing, God had a good plan, and in the end that was revealed at the end of the book of Genesis. Well, this morning's story in John is the man born blind. And if last week's would fall into that category of moral evil, what people do, the sinful, horrible things people do to each other, this story in John chapter 9 has to do with the other category, natural evil. And we see a man who was born blind, who spent years, probably decades of his life blind, unable to see. And so we're going to look at this story and what God was revealing about his condition and God's kindness and mercy to him through Christ and through what Christ did in his life. I read recently about a culture where the people believe that every newborn baby has imprinted on him or her their destiny or their fate. And where I was reading about that, the author proposed this idea, this kind of thought experiment. And he said, suppose God gave you two gifts, one being a set of glasses by which you could read whatever that destiny that's imprinted on your child, and two, the second gift being a pencil with which you could both erase and write and edit that destiny. So if that destiny included every detail, every up, every down, every success, every failure, every experience of pleasure and every experience of pain. And then he asks this question: how many of you as parents could resist the urge to edit that story and to erase every hardship? I mean, if you think about, many of you have kids, or some of you have grandkids. I mean, if you could, if you're honest, probably all of you would edit that story. Or if it's your story, if somehow God gave you an opportunity to edit your own story and to erase some of the hardships, I mean, who could resist the temptation of doing that? Wouldn't we all make changes? We'd make adjustments. And what that seemingly insignificant idea, that little thought experiment, what that exposes is that we humans, deep down, we do have a bit of a problem with our Creator, because we know He's the author of all things, and we know that He writes into the story of our lives and the lives of other people tremendous suffering, excruciatingly painful experiences in this world. It's undeniable. We know that to be true. So take the example of disabilities, because we're going to talk about a man with a disability from birth. I mean, every day around this world, children are born with one form of disability or another, a deformity, disfigurement of some kind. It happens all the time. And especially when that touches us, if it's us or if it's someone that we love, if we're honest, we don't like that. We have a problem with that. It's not the way we would write the story. Those same human dynamics and those same spiritual or philosophical dynamics are at play in the story we're going to look at in John chapter 9. And we're going to see that contrary to having some kind of maniacal, evil intentions for such a thing, God actually has good intentions for those types of experiences of suffering in this world. He is the author of all things. He is the author of our lives. He is the author of every life in this world. And He has good intentions, redemptive purposes. And if we can allow God to open our eyes to who He really is and what He's like, despite even in and through such hardships, there is tremendous relief and peace and joy, I believe. And so that's what we're hoping to have happen this morning as we're in John chapter 9, familiar passage, familiar story, probably to many of you, the man born blind. So let's read it and walk through it and consider what Jesus was up to in this situation with a real person living thousands of years ago. Let's consider what Christ was up to in His life and learn from it in our lives as well. So read with me chapter 9, verses 1 through 7 as we start here. And we'll just walk through and make some observations. It says, as Jesus, as He passed by, He saw a man blind from birth. And His disciples asked Him, Rabbi, who sinned, this man or his parents, that he would be born blind? Jesus answered, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but it was so that the works of God might be displayed in him. We must work the works of Him who sent me as long as it is day. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world. When He had said this, He spat on the ground and made clay of the spittle and applied the clay to his eyes and said to him, go, wash in the pool of Siloam, which is translated, sent. So he went away and washed and came back seeing. So Jesus, traveling with His disciples, and they encounter this man born blind. He's there begging along the side of the road. And I want you to think about what it would be like to live year after year after year, blind, unable to see. It's easy to fly by this. I've known people in my life who have been blind, and they've described what that's like for them and how difficult that is. Maybe some of you are experiencing the deterioration of your sight, depending on your age and your physical makeup and what's happening in your body. But think about never being able to see and what that how that limits you in life. Seeing no colors, no beauty of any kind. You see no sunrises, no sunsets, nothing in between. You know the expression, a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So for someone who can't see, they never see a picture, they never see the reality of the material world around them, they never see anything. And so think about how that shrinks life down. Well, this guy has spent his whole life this way. And he's a beggar because as a beggar, or as a blind person, I should say, in those days, really hard to fit into the economy. Don't have much to offer. And so he's spending his life alongside of the road, begging people for money, knowing that all these people around him can see. And what do you think he's feeling on the inside, knowing that to be the case? Think he's content with it, fully at peace with it, or probably struggling, probably not happy about it, probably resentful, probably humiliated? That would be the latter, wouldn't it? As it would be for any of us. That's what life was like for this man. In a very real sense, a humiliating life. He was treated as a second-class citizen, an outcast. And think of what happens here. As Jesus and the disciples walk by him, they say right there where he can hear them, and they're right next to him when they say, hey, who sinned, this man or his parents? Think about that and how kind of rude that is to say right in front of him. And what that says about their assumption. What's their assumption? If they say, well, who sinned here? What's their assumption? Well, you end up like this because someone did something wrong. Typical human, conditional, tit-for-tat thinking. Someone must have sinned. We'll see later in the story, the religious leaders, they think the same way. They attribute this type of thing to sin. Well, these are the worst of the worst people. That's why they're cursed in this way by God. Lowest of the low. That's the way they would have viewed this blind man. And Jesus, look at how he answers. He has a completely different category. He says, it was neither that this man sinned nor his parents, but so that the works of God might be displayed in him. It wasn't that there was some specific sin. I mean, we could say, generally speaking, the Bible reveals that, yes, all of the aspects of the curse, all the manifestations of the curse have to do with sin in general, for sure. But she said, look, this is not some specific divine curse because of a generational sin or anything else like that. No, there's a completely different intention here. Notice the intention is a good intention. It's so the works of God might be displayed in him. And I want you to wrestle with this throughout, and hopefully we can resolve this somewhat in the end. But I want you to wrestle with this question. Think about this. This guy spent his whole life this way so that he would be an opportunity for God to manifest his works. Basically, this guy's life, years, decades of blindness, to be an illustration, a living metaphor, an object lesson of some kind. I mean, if you're him, it's kind of a hard pill to swallow. That's what Jesus is saying. Hey, this is why. Back in Exodus, Moses is arguing with God about the calling on his life and says, hey, I can't do this. I can't speak well. I'm not equipped for this calling of confronting Pharaoh and all that was going to happen there. And God says to him, hey, Moses, who made man mute or deaf, seeing or blind? Is it not I, the Lord? I mean, who's in control of this? Who determined that this man would be born blind? God did. And it wasn't that there was a specific sin or this guy or his family, that they were somehow worse than other people. Nope, it is for a good intention from God's perspective. He has a good plan for this. Again, I know you're all good church people, but just be honest with yourself for a second. If that's you, if that's a loved one, you're probably not okay with that. That this guy's whole life would just be a metaphor. An object lesson for this time when Jesus encounters him here. Challenging, for sure. Well, let's keep reading here. He says, I'm the light of the world. And he's going to turn the lights on in more ways than one. And he tells the man, he heals him and tells him to go wash in the pool, as we read. And right away he was healed, and he came back seeing, which you can imagine, having not seen anything and now seeing. You just can only imagine what that is like when your eyes are opened and this sense perception that everyone else around you has had and you have not had. I mean, it's amazing, marvelous for him to see things for the first time, probably appreciated way more than you and I. When we woke up this morning, the fact that we could open our eyes and see, I'm sure he appreciated it way more. Something dramatic and spectacular happened there. Let's read verse 8 and following. It says, therefore the neighbors and those who previously saw him as a beggar were saying, is not this the one who used to sit and beg? Others were saying, this is he. Still others were saying, no, but he's like him. It can't be him. This guy can see. It can't be him. And he kept saying, I am the one. So they were saying to him, how then were your eyes opened? He answered, the man who is called Jesus. He made clay and anointed my eyes and said to me, go to Siloam and wash. So I went away and washed, and I received sight. They said to him, where is he? He said, I don't know. So the neighbors are blown away by what's happened here. And they're inquiring, where is this Jesus who healed you? It's amazing. Continue reading here. Verse 13. Then they brought the Pharisees, the man who was formerly blind. They had to check in with the religious leaders. Hey, what do you make of this? And now it was on the Sabbath when Jesus made the clay and opened his eyes. Shame on Jesus, right? He worked on the Sabbath day. So the Pharisees, were asking him again how he received his sight, and he said to them, he applied clay to my eyes, and I washed, and I see. Therefore some of the Pharisees were saying, this man is not from God, because he doesn't keep the Sabbath. I mean, he broke the law. In their eyes, at least, he broke the law. How could he be sent from God? But others were saying, how can a man who is a sinner perform such signs? And there was a division among them. So they said to the blind man again, what do you say about him since he opened your eyes? And he said, he is a prophet. Not grasping fully the magnitude of what happened in terms of who Christ really was, but he said, hey, this is definitely a man sent from God. This is not a sinner. This is not a man in the category that you're ascribing to him. So there's this upheaval and this debate going on in the religious community there. Verse 18, the Jews then did not believe it of him, that he had been blind and had received his sight. That can't be. Until they called the parents of the very one who had received his sight and questioned them, saying, is this your son who you say was born blind? How then does he now see? His parents answered them and said, we know that this is our son and that he was born blind, but how he sees we do not know, or who opened his eyes we do not know. Ask him, he is of age, he will speak for himself. It's an important clarifying point here, kind of explanatory point. His parents said this because they were afraid of the Jews, for the Jews had already agreed that if anyone confessed him to be the Christ, he was to be put out of the synagogue. For this reason, his parents said, he is of age, ask him. So you see there, they're trying to protect themselves, but back up one step. Why are they trying to protect themselves? Because the religious community was not a healthy religious community. It was a community of categories, community of measurements, comparisons, sinners and lesser sinners. And this man was considered the worst of sinners, being blind, and his parents knew that there would be a certain shame associated with that. And now they know, well, if we say this is Christ and he has healed our son, then we could be put out, we could be outcasted, and they didn't want any part of that. We're comfortable here in our little security setup that we have within this religious community. So do you see, there's real significant upheaval here happening. And they are trying to shield themselves from it, and they say, hey, he's an adult, you go ask him, let's stay out of this. Which, once again, is indicative of just how perverse the typical human religious community is and how far from the heart of God it so often is with these measurements and comparisons. At any rate, verse 24 says, so a second time they called the man who had been blind and said to him, give glory to God. We know that this man is a sinner. He then answered, whether he is a sinner, I do not know. One thing I do know, that though I was blind, now I see. So, hey, we know this Jesus, he can't be, he's not some prophet, he's not some man of God. He's a sinner like everyone else. And the man born blind says, on the contrary, I know this. And he says, well, whether he's a sinner or not, I don't know. One thing I know, I was blind, now I see. It's pretty simple. So they said to him, what did he do to you? How did he open your eyes? And he said to them, I told you already, and did you not listen? Why do you want to hear it again? You don't want to become his disciples too, do you? Is a little bit, snarky here, a little overconfident maybe in some ways. They reviled him and said, you are his disciple, but we are disciples of Moses. We're Bible followers. We follow Moses in the Old Testament, good religious people. We know that God has spoken to Moses, but as for this man, we do not know where he is from. The man answered, said to them, well, here's an amazing thing, that you do not know where he's from, and yet he opened my eyes. We know that God does not hear sinners, but if anyone is God-fearing and does his will, he hears him. Since the beginning of time, it's never been heard that anyone opened the eyes of a person born blind. If this man were not from God, he could do nothing. So he goes on and say, look, this is what happened. This man healed me. They answered him, you were born entirely in sins, and are you teaching us? They're insulted by his arrogance. Who are you? And even the way they say, you were born entirely in sins. You're born, literally, it's like completely sinful. Yeah, okay, there's sin. None of us, no one's perfect. But you're the worst of the worst. Shut your mouth. We don't want to hear from you. And all he can give is his testimony, and he kind of confidently gives his testimony. And And he keeps just saying, I know what's happened to me and for me. And then we read the end of the story here, last section, verse 35 through 41. Jesus heard that they had put him out. And finding him, he said, do you believe in the Son of Man? He answered, who is he, Lord, that I may believe in him? Jesus said to him, you have both seen him, and he is the one who is talking with you. And he said, Lord, I believe. And he worshipped him. And Jesus said, for judgment I came into this world, so that those who do not see may see, and that those who see may become blind. Those of the Pharisees who were with him heard these things and said to him, we are not blind too, are we? Jesus said to them, if you were blind, you would have no sin. But since you say, we see, your sin remains. So the man born blind has gratitude. He doesn't see it with crystal clarity, but he does see with more clarity who Jesus is. He knows that a work of salvation and deliverance has been done in his life, and he is amazed. And he is now seeing Jesus in more ways than one. He's seeing him physically, of course, and that's amazing and miraculous, and almost more amazing and almost more miraculous is that he's seeing Jesus as being the Messiah, as being his Savior, his rescuer. And while he has lived years, decades of his life in a form of misery, suffering, hardship, safe to say now he has a different perspective of all of that. As he's there seeing for the first time, amazed at this sense that he's never had, blown away by the grace of God shown to him, especially when he knew the way people thought of him, that he was considered the lowest of the low, the worst of the worst. He knew the reputation that went along with his condition, and he had been forgiven, relieved, healed, a personal touch from God. Sure, at some level he was amazed, and Jesus goes on to talk about what was happening here in terms of the truthfulness of this, in terms of what was happening at the heart level, what God was up to. And Jesus says, I came for judgment. I came to distinguish. And that word judgment, we think of it in legal terms today, and we think of a judge in a courtroom, and it certainly in those days had to do with people who were in that role of presiding over and ruling in terms of giving a verdict of a crime or an unjust activity, for sure, but it's more basically just has to do with distinguishing, just separating, sifting out. And what Jesus is saying here is there's sifting going on, and there are people who see but don't see. There's a man who didn't see but now sees. Who are the people who saw but weren't really seeing? They're the Pharisees, and that's why he said, when they asked of him, you're not saying we're blind too, are you? And he kind of says, yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Verse 41, if you were blind, you would have no sin. In other words, if you would admit your blindness, then you would have no sin. That would be an expression of righteousness. That would be a revelation that you're seeing it clearly. But because you say, we see, your sin remains. Because you're so sure of yourselves. And I mean, don't you get the sense that these guys took themselves pretty seriously as you read the Gospels? I mean, they took themselves real seriously. They were real confident in their perspective. They were real confident in their theology and their understanding of Moses and his teaching. They knew what they were doing, and they felt pretty good about themselves and their position in the church. And Jesus is now reducing them to a position of nothingness and saying, because you insist on the fact that you see, in reality, I'm revealing to you the real fact that you don't see. You're blind. You're blind. And there's this, he's differentiating between what it means to see and what it means to be blind. And in a weird kind of counterintuitive way, and to use the big word paradox, in a paradoxical way, it's this idea that those who can admit their blindness are the ones who see, and those who can't are the ones who are blind. Those who can admit that they don't understand the nature of God and the nature of His world, that they have blind spots, that they question His authority because of their own natural thinking and need revelation and need rescue on that level, those are the ones who are seeing. But the ones who say, well, no, I get it, and no, I can fit these things nice and neat and tidy into my religious categories, and think of the problem of evil again. Well, it's just this and that. I've heard people talk to other suffering people. I've been guilty of this in the past, minimizing other people's suffering, not really sympathizing with what it's like. That's why I tried to paint that picture earlier for you with regard to this man's blindness and how hard that would be for any of us. I mean, it doesn't take much for me, the little hardships, the little forms of suffering in my life, for me to be derailed and struggle and resentful and woe is me. And you probably have your own version of that. Whatever it is, stubbing your toe or some diagnosis from a doctor that you don't want to get, that you dread, whatever it is. We wrestle with the author of the story. We said it earlier. We would only write good things for ourselves, prosperous things for ourselves. We wouldn't write into our story these forms of suffering and hardship and years and decades of blindness or anything else. We wouldn't. And that by itself is indicative of this reality that we just don't understand. And one of the hardest things for us to do is to accept our small place. Accept the fact that God is both good and all-powerful, and He has good purposes for the evil that He allows and even ordains to occur in this world. And that beyond this, there's a greater hope that one day, just like this man saw, he saw the living Christ, he saw everything in the material world for the first time, and he went on to still die, didn't he? But for him, for us, there's this hope of a world beyond, a new heaven, a new earth in which righteousness dwells, in which there is no longer any curse. And that's going to go on for how long? Forever. So when we're there forever, when you've been seeing perfectly one, God Himself, who He is, celebrating Him, filled with joy, and you've been seeing everything in the new heaven and new earth, the material world, perfect eyesight, no more cataracts or glaucoma or anything else or any kind of blindness, seeing for 1 trillion years, gives some perspective, doesn't it? That's why Paul said, and he really said it a few different times in different ways, but in one place he said, the sufferings of this present time aren't worthy to be compared to the glory that will be revealed to us. We will see just as God sees us. We will know as we are known. That's why Paul elsewhere also says, right now we see in a mirror dimly. The Bible uses this metaphor of seeing often from beginning to end. And there's this place where Paul says, we see in a mirror dimly. And in those days, mirrors weren't like today, especially when you clean them and they're nice and clear and you see yourself real sharp picture. Well, back then, it was polished metal or brass. And so you could see, but it was still kind of cloudy. And he's using that illustration to say, hey, you still see in a cloudy way, but one day you're going to see with crystal clarity, and you're going to know even as you're known, even as the omniscient God knows you, you are going to know. You're going to know and understand things. We're finally going to see God's heart for what is His love, His mercy, His compassion, His kindness, His generosity. We're going to see all that, and we're going to exist in this perfect creation in which there's no more sin, no more curse, no more death, no more tears, no more suffering, and that's going to go on forever. And all this that happens in this world, this storyline, your life as an individual, the lives of all individuals, even thousands of years of human history will be like a blip in the grand scheme. And I'm sure the man born blind here in John chapter 9 didn't understand all the significance of all that, but Jesus was doing something to open his eyes, to make an impression on him, to impact him in a way that he never would have been impacted had he not lived decades with blindness. I mean, think about, and so then we'll start to kind of wrap it up this way, and just to make it personal to you and for you to appreciate the goodness of God in your life. Think about the parts of your life that, like for the blind man, render you a bit humiliated. The parts of your life that if you had that eraser, man, you would erase from the story. Aches and pains, disabilities of one kind or another, hardship, a blemish on your track record, a whole bunch of blemishes on your track record. I mean, whatever it is, that you would erase and write something else there. Whatever that is, the things that you want to escape and avoid, things that cause you the deepest experiences of anxiety and fear and resentment and frustration and jealousy. And we're invited here to listen to a God who is revealing himself as the author of our story, to include all those ups and downs. Especially, we're invited to consider, to wrestle with and receive God's grace and mercy in the area of those things that we resent the most, that we wrestle with the most. The most painful things. There's a good God. He's up to good. He was back then. He is today. We could say, well, look at this guy. So he lived all these years suffering like this just to be a living metaphor. Just for this occasion. For Jesus to point to him and say, hey, you see this man who was blind and now he sees. Well, you remain in your blindness, even though you see. Seems strange. You could say it doesn't seem fair, doesn't seem right. But as God has revealed himself here, we have an occasion to think more deeply, more broadly, to zoom out and see, wow, there is so much more going on in the suffering that God allows. He is up to good and revealing himself. One day, our experience in Christ, when we are fully realized in glorification and in union with our Father and everyone else, we will see then even more clearly that these things are part of the story God has written, and it is a good story. And we can delight in it, celebrate it, give thanks for it. And as we wrestle with those dark realities of our lives, not just philosophically, but of our very lives, we can say, God, would you help me? Would you open my eyes to see? I can't see here. Can't see how this is good. Please open my eyes. And the same Christ who had mercy on that man thousands of years ago has mercy on us today. As we admit to him, I can't see. It's encouraging to me. I hope it is to you as well. Let's close in prayer. Father, thank you for the story you've recorded. We admit, Lord, that we wrestle with you and how you chose to do things in this world. We know that if you exist, that you're the author and that you're in control and that you could stop these horrible things from happening, whether in the moral evil category or the natural evil category, but yet you allow them to happen countless times, countless different ways on this planet, and you have since the beginning. And so, God, we admit that we wrestle with you. We wrestle especially with those areas that touch our lives or loved ones. If it were up to us, we would write the story differently, but we confess to you in this moment that we know that is an expression of our own pride and our own rebellion and our own autonomy, and we think we know what's good for us, but we really don't. So, God, would you help us to accept the revelation of your righteousness and your word, revealing of your goodness to us through Christ. Help us to accept our small place in this storyline of your creation and your redemption. Give us the needed revelations of truth, the glimpses of light. Help us see Christ and his kindness. Give us perspective, God. Give us eternal perspective. Help us to see more of the big picture and to accept the challenges here as we wait to go home and be with you, be fully redeemed, fully glorified, fully complete, never lacking in any way in the end for all eternity. So we thank you for these promises. We thank you for the way they minister to us. We thank you for the relatability of all this and how we can identify with this man thousands of years ago. We can give thanks for what Christ has done for us personally and individually, and the great hope we have because of him and in him. It's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.